He thought his billions gave him the right to treat people like trash. He thought his expensive suit made him untouchable. But mostly, Damien Cross thought the young waitress cleaning his table was too uneducated to understand the insults he was whispering about her in Mandarin. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Watch what happens when a billionaire pushes the wrong woman too far and learns that in a room full of sharks, the quietest person is often the deadliest. This is the story of the insult that cost a man his empire. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City smelled of old money, expensive perfume, and the faint, metallic scent of desperation. It was the night of the Helios Charity Gala, an event where a single ticket cost more than what Cassandra Cassie filed on her tax returns for the last 3 years combined. Cassie adjusted the collar of her stiff, black uniform. It was intentionally unflattering, designed to make the waitstaff blend into the wallpaper. That was the point. To men like the ones in this room, the servers weren't people. They were automated delivery systems for champagne and canapés. Table 4 needs a refill on the sparkling water, and Table 9 is asking for the vegan option that doesn't exist. The floor manager, a sweaty man named Rick, hissed into her earpiece. "Move it, Sterling." "On it," Cassie whispered, gripping her silver tray tighter. Her hands were steady, but her legs ached. 2 years ago, Cassandra Sterling hadn't been serving drinks. She had been analyzing market trends for a boutique logistics firm in Shanghai. She had been on track for a junior partnership. Then, the crash happened. Her father's medical bills had wiped out the family savings. Her company had folded overnight due to an embezzlement scandal she had nothing to do with, and she had returned to the States with $3 in her pocket and a resume that no one looked at because of the gap years abroad. Now she was 30 minutes away from the end of a 12-hour shift. She just needed to survive the night. The room was buzzing with the arrival of the night's guest of honor. The air pressure seemed to drop as the double door swung open. "That's him," another waitress, Jessica, whispered as she passed by Cassie to load dirty dishes. Damien Cross, the CEO of Cross Atlantic Tech. I heard he fires people if they make eye contact with him for too long. Cassie glanced over. Damien Cross was undeniably handsome in a predatory way. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, likely tailored on Savile Row. He was tall, with slicked back dark hair and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. But it was his eyes that unsettled her, cold, bored, and scanning the room as if he were deciding what to buy and what to destroy. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a delegation of businessmen from Beijing. This was the rumor of the night. Cross was trying to secure exclusive manufacturing rights in the Guangdong province, a deal worth $4 billion. Cassie kept her head down, balancing a tray of crystal flutes. "Just do the job, Cassie. You need the rent money." She wove through the crowd, invisible, silent. She reached Table 5, adjacent to where Damien Cross had stopped to hold court. She began clearing the empty appetizer plates, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who couldn't afford a mistake. "This swill is warm," a voice boomed. Cassie froze. She wasn't at Damien's table, but he was standing directly behind her, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't served him. He turned, his movement sudden and aggressive, and his elbow clipped the edge of her tray. It was physics. It was an accident. But in the world of the ultra-rich, accidents were always the fault of the poor. The tray tilted. A single half-empty glass of red wine, left by a guest at Table 5, slid off. Cassie lunged to catch it, her reflexes sharp, but she was a split second too late. The glass didn't shatter, but the red liquid splashed outward. 3 drops, just 3 drops of Merlot, landed on the pristine white cuff of Damien Cross's shirt. The music didn't stop, but the silence that radiated from Damien Cross was loud enough to stop the hearts of everyone nearby. Damien looked at his cuff. Then he looked at Cassie. He didn't yell. Yelling was for people who had to prove their power. Damien simply stared at her with a look of profound disgust, as if she were a cockroach that had scurried across his dinner plate. "I am so sorry, sir," Cassie said immediately, grabbing a linen napkin from her apron. "Let me get some club soda. It will lift right out." "Don't touch me," Damien said. His voice was low, smooth, and terrified her more than a shout would have. He took a step back, brushing his sleeve as if her proximity was contagious. "Rick!" Damien didn't look away from Cassie as he called for the manager. Rick appeared instantly, materializing out of the crowd like a nervous genie. "Mr. Cross, is there a problem? I saw. Oh, God." Rick saw the stain. He turned to Cassie, his face turning purple. "Sterling, what did you do?" "He bumped into me," Cassie said, keeping her voice calm despite the racing of her heart. "It was an accident. I can fix it." "An accident?" Damien let out a short, dry laugh. He turned to the room, performing for his audience. "You hire clumsy incompetents to serve at a gala where plates cost $5,000, and you call it an accident. Look at this shirt. This is custom weave. It's ruined." "I will deduct the cleaning cost from her pay, Mr. Cross. Absolutely," Rick stammered, sweating profusely. "Sterling, get to the kitchen. You're done for the night." Cassie bit her lip. She couldn't afford to lose this shift. The tips alone were going to pay her electric bill. "Sir," she said, addressing Damien directly, looking him in the eye. "It was a mistake. I was clearing the table behind you, and you turned quickly. I apologize for the damage, but it really was just an accident." Damien's eyes narrowed. He clearly wasn't used to the help speaking to him in full sentences, let alone defending themselves. "You think I care about your excuses?" Damien sneered, stepping closer, invading her personal space to intimidate her. "You are here to serve, not to speak. You are invisible. And when you fail at being invisible, you become a liability." He looked her up and down, taking in her scuffed work shoes and the loose uniform. He smirked. "Get her out of my sight, Rick. She's ruining the aesthetic of the evening." Rick grabbed Cassie's arm roughly. "Let's go, Cassandra." But Damien wasn't done. He turned his back on her, dismissing her existence, and faced the Chinese delegation, led by Mr. Li, a stern-faced older man who had been watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Damien adjusted his jacket, smiled charmingly at Mr. Li, and switched languages. He began to speak in Mandarin. He assumed, safely, that in a New York ballroom filled with American socialites and low-skilled workers, no one outside of his immediate circle would understand him. He assumed the waitress was just an uneducated American girl who barely finished high school. He assumed wrong. Cassie was being pulled away by Rick, but she stopped. She stopped because she heard the tones, the rising and falling inflections of a language she had spent 5 years mastering while living in a tiny apartment in the Zhuhui district of Shanghai, studying business during the day and teaching English at night. Damien was speaking to Mr. Li. "Zhege fuhu yuan bende xiang zhu yi yang," Damien said in Mandarin, chuckling. "The waitress is as stupid as a pig." Rick tugged on her arm. "Come on, stop stalling." Cassie planted her feet. She didn't move. Her blood began to heat up, a slow burn starting at the base of her spine. Damien continued, gesturing vaguely behind him toward Cassie, assuming she was already gone. "Mei guo dedicheng ren, tamen mei yu jiaoyang, ta shenji bu peige wo kasie." The American lower class. They have no breeding. She isn't even fit to shine my shoes. Mr. Li didn't laugh. He merely raised an eyebrow, glancing past Damien to where Cassie was standing. Damien, thinking he was bonding with the client over their shared superiority, pushed it further. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, still in Mandarin. "Don't worry about the disturbance, Mr. Lee. It's just noise, like a stray dog barking. Once we sign the deal tomorrow, we can ensure that your factories are staffed with more obedient workers than this trash." That was it. It wasn't just the insult to her. It was the arrogance, the dehumanization, the assumption that money made him a god and her a bug. Cassie remembered her father, a man who worked himself to death, who was treated like trash by men like Damien Cross when he lost his fortune. Something snapped. Not a psychotic snap, but a clarity, a cold, crystalline realization that she had absolutely nothing left to lose. Rick pulled her arm again. "I said move." Cassie shook Rick's hand off. It was a sharp, authoritative motion that surprised the manager so much he actually let go. She smoothed the front of her apron. She took a deep breath. She lifted her chin. She turned around and walked back toward Damien Cross. "Sterling, what are you doing?" Rick hissed, panic rising in his voice. "Don't you dare!" The room went quiet. People sensed the tension. Why was the waitress walking back to the billionaire? Was she going to beg? Was she going to throw a drink? Damien heard the footsteps and turned around, an annoyed expression on his face. "I thought I told you to leave. Do you need security to escort you?" Cassie stopped 3 feet from him. She held his gaze. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at his tie. She looked right into his cold, grey eyes. She opened her mouth, and when she spoke, the sound was clear, melodious, and perfectly accented. "Cross Yansheng, Nidelingdai Waile, Kenide Auman Keshijide." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. She had said in flawless Mandarin, "Mr. Cross, your tie is crooked, but your arrogance is perfectly straight." Damien's jaw literally dropped. His eyes widened, flickering with confusion. He processed the sounds, but his brain refused to accept that they were coming from the woman in the cheap polyester uniform. "Excuse me," he whispered in English, his composure cracking. Cassie didn't switch back to English. She turned slightly to address Mr. Lee and his delegation, bowing her head respectfully, a perfect, culturally appropriate bow of an equal, not a servant. "Li Zong, what is away Xian Sheng de Kulu Daoqian," she said, her voice projecting through the silent ballroom. "Tayiwei Jinqianke Mai Dao Pinwai, Dan Jian Ran, Tadeqian Hua Kuo Le Difang." President Li, "I apologize for this gentleman's rudeness. He thinks money can buy class, but clearly he spent his money in the wrong place." Mr. Lee's eyes lit up. A slow smile spread across his face. He looked from the stunned billionaire to the waitress standing with the posture of a queen. Damien's face flushed a deep, violent red. He understood enough Mandarin to know he was being insulted, but she was speaking too fast, using idioms and formal structures that were far above his basic business-level proficiency. "You," Damien sputtered, pointing a finger at her. "You speak Chinese?" Cassie finally switched to English. Her voice was cool, stripped of any servitude. "I speak 4 languages, Mr. Cross," she said, her voice ringing out so the nearby tables could hear. "I lived in Shanghai for 5 years. I hold a double major in international economics and logistics, and I know that calling someone a pig and trash right in front of them isn't a power move. It's a sign of deep insecurity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were out. People were recording. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Damien snarled, stepping forward, his hands balled into fists. "You're a nobody, a waitress." "I am a waitress tonight because I have bills to pay," Cassie said, not backing down an inch. But dignity? That's free. And you can't take it from me. She unpinned her name tag. She placed it gently on the tray she had left on the table. I believe you mentioned I wasn't fit to shine your shoes, Cassie said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. I wouldn't worry about your shoes, Mr. Cross. I'd worry about the Guangdong's deal. Because if I understood you correctly, you just promised Mr. Li you'd treat his workers better than you treat me. And I think Mr. Li just saw exactly how much your promises are worth. She looked at Mr. Li. The Chinese businessman nodded at her, a subtle, distinct nod of respect. Damien looked at Mr. Li, panic suddenly flooding his eyes. Mr. Li, wait. She's just a disgruntled employee. She doesn't know what she's— I quit, Cassie said simply. She turned on her heel and walked away. Rick, the manager, stood with his mouth open, too stunned to stop her. The room parted for her as she walked toward the exit. She felt light. She felt terrified. She had no job, no money, and she had just humiliated one of the most powerful men in New York. She thought that was the end of it. She thought she would go home, cry, and look for a job at a diner in New Jersey. She didn't know that Mr. Li wasn't just a businessman. She didn't know that someone else had been watching from the shadows of the balcony, a man who had been looking for someone with exactly her kind of fire. And she certainly didn't know that by the next morning, that video of her shutting down Damien Cross would have 5 million views, and her life was about to become a lot more complicated. The war had just begun. The morning after the gala, Cassandra Sterling didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a fugitive. She woke up in her cramped studio apartment in Queens to the sound of her phone vibrating itself off the nightstand. It had fallen onto the floor and was buzzing against the linoleum like an angry hornet. Groggily, she picked it up. Her screen was flooded. 400 missed calls. 5,000 notifications. Her Instagram, which she hadn't updated in 2 years, was blowing up. She opened the first link sent by her friend from the catering company. It was a TikTok video. The caption read, "Waitress destroys billionaire Damien Cross in fluent Mandarin. Cash eat the rich. Chash girl boss." The video was shaky, filmed by a guest at a nearby table, but the audio was crystal clear. There was Damien, looking sneering and arrogant. And there was Cassie, standing tall, delivering her verbal slap with the precision of a surgeon. Cassie sat on the edge of her bed, her stomach churning. The comments were overwhelmingly on her side. She cooked him. Give this queen a CEO position. Damien Cross looks like he's about to cry. But internet points didn't pay rent, and Damien Cross was not the kind of man who let things go. A sharp knock on her door made her jump. Cassie pulled on a robe and looked through the peephole. It wasn't the police. It was a courier in a dark uniform. She opened the door a crack. "Yes? Cassandra Sterling? Who's asking?" "You've been served." He shoved a thick manila envelope through the crack and walked away. Cassie ripped it open, her hands trembling. It was a legal notice from the law firm Vanguard and Stone. A cease and desist order, and a lawsuit for defamation of character, seeking damages of $5 million. $5 million. Cassie sank onto her floor, the paper crumpling in her hand. He was trying to bury her. He knew she didn't have $5 million. He knew she didn't have $500. This was intimidation, pure and simple. Her phone rang again. It was the temp agency she worked for. "Cassandra?" The voice on the other end was cold. "Don't bother coming into the office. Your contract is terminated effective immediately." "Because of the video?" Cassie asked, her voice shaking. "He insulted me first. I just defended myself." "Mr. Cross is a major client of the Plaza, and the Plaza is a major client of ours. We can't have hostile elements on our roster. You're blacklisted, Cassie. I'm sorry, but you won't find high-end service work in this city again." The line went dead. Cassie stared at the wall. In the span of 12 hours, she had gone from invisible to viral, and now to unemployable. She spent the next 3 days in a haze of panic. She applied to logistics jobs, but the moment they Googled her name, the applications went silent. Damien Cross had a media team spinning the narrative. New articles were popping up. The unhinged waitress, inside the staged stunt to sabotage the Cross-China deal. They were painting her as a corporate spy, a hysterical woman, a liar. On the 4th day, her landlord knocked on the door. He didn't serve her papers. He just looked sad. "Cassie, I got a call. Someone bought the building yesterday. The new management wants all month-to-month tenants out by Friday. They're renovating." Cassie laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. "He bought the building? He bought a tenement building in Queens just to kick me out?" "I don't know who he is," the landlord said, avoiding her eyes. "But these guys don't mess around." She was being erased, systematically dismantled by a man with infinite resources who couldn't handle a bruised ego. That evening, Cassie sat in a park bench near the East River, watching the city lights flicker. She had one suitcase packed. She had nowhere to go. She was considering using her last bit of cash for a bus ticket to Ohio to stay with a distant cousin. It's a beautiful view, isn't it? Hard to believe such a pretty city can be so ugly on the inside. Cassie didn't turn. "I don't have any spare change, sir." "I don't want your change, Miss Sterling. I want your brain." Cassie turned. Standing next to the bench was an older man, perhaps in his 60s. He leaned on a silver-handled cane, wearing a wool coat that whispered expensive in a way Damien's flashy suits never did. This was quiet wealth. Old wealth. "Who are you?" Cassie asked, gripping her purse. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," the man said. "I own Pendleton Logistics, and until recently, I was the primary bidder for the manufacturing rights in Guangdong, until Mr. Cross swooped in with his flashy smile and deeper pockets." Cassie's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "I was at the gala," Arthur said, sitting down on the bench next to her, leaving a respectful distance. "I saw what you did. I saw how you handled yourself. And more importantly, I heard your Mandarin. It wasn't just fluent, Cassandra. It was the dialect of the southern provinces. You sounded like a local." "I lived there," Cassie said defensively. "I worked in supply chain management for 5 years before the crash." "I know," Arthur smiled. "I looked you up. Your resume is impressive. Unjustly ignored, I might add. The embezzlement scandal at your old firm. I know you were the one who blew the whistle, not the one who took the money. You're honest, and right now, you're angry." "He's ruining my life," Cassie whispered, the fight draining out of her. "He's suing me. He got me fired. He's even evicting me." "Damien is a child with a flamethrower," Arthur said with disdain. "He burns what he can't control, but he has a weakness. He underestimates everyone. He thinks he has the Guangdong deal with Mr. Lee in the bag. He thinks Mr. Lee respects him." Arthur turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Lee doesn't respect him. Mr. Lee values protocol and culture. Damien insulted those. The deal isn't signed yet, Cassandra. There is a final negotiation meeting in 3 days." "So?" Cassie asked. "What does that have to do with me?" "I want you to be my lead negotiator," Arthur said calmly. Cassie stared at him. "You want a waitress to negotiate a $4 billion deal?" "No," Arthur corrected her. "I want a qualified, bilingual logistics expert who understands the cultural nuance of the Chinese market to negotiate the deal." The fact that she happens to be the woman who humiliated Damien Cross publicly? That is just the cherry on top. He pulled a card from his pocket. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock. I will pay for your legal defense against Damien's lawsuit. I have lawyers who eat men like him for breakfast. I will provide you with a salary that reflects your actual worth, not minimum wage. And I will give you the chance to walk into that boardroom and take everything he wants away from him. Arthur stood up. The car is waiting. Do you want to run away to Ohio, Ms. Sterling? Or do you want to stay and fight? Cassie looked at the card. She looked at the city skyline, where Damien Cross was likely celebrating in a penthouse, thinking he had crushed her. She stood up. She smoothed her jeans. The fear in her chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard determination. Let's go, she said. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity that felt more like a military operation than a job onboarding. Arthur Pendleton didn't just give her a job, he gave her an arsenal. She was moved into a corporate suite at the St. Regis, ironically, just blocks away from where she had been fired. First, we handle the optics, Arthur said. He brought in a legal team led by a woman named Jessica Pearson, no relation to the TV character, but just as fierce. Within hours, they had filed a countersuit for harassment and unlawful termination against the catering company, and a motion to dismiss Damien's defamation suit. They released a statement to the press. Ms. Sterling will not be intimidated by bullying tactics. She looks forward to the truth coming out in court. The narrative shifted instantly. People love an underdog who bites back. But the real work was in the war room of Pendleton Logistics. The Guangdong deal hinges on the last mile problem, Cassie explained to Arthur and his board of directors on her first full day. She was pointing at a digital map of southern China. Damien's proposal relies on building new distribution hubs. It's flashy, it's expensive, and Mr. Lee hates it because it requires displacing 3 ancestral villages. The board members, mostly older men who had been skeptical of the Waitress strategy, leaned in. How do you know this? One director asked. Because I read Mr. Lee's autobiography, Cassie said, not missing a beat. And because I know that region. The roads are too narrow for the trucks Damien wants to use. His plan will fail within 6 months. My proposal uses the existing river network for microfreight. It's 40% cheaper, greener, and it respects the local geography. It's exactly the kind of harmony with nature philosophy Mr. Lee preaches. Arthur smiled from the head of the table. This, he said, pointing at Cassie, is why she is here. Damien is selling a product. Cassandra is selling a partnership. They worked 18-hour days. Cassie didn't sleep. She didn't want to. For the first time in wars, her brain was firing on all cylinders. She wasn't carrying trays, she was moving mountains. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. The image. You can't walk into that meeting looking like you apologize for existing, Arthur told her on the morning of the negotiation. He sent in a stylist. This wasn't about making her look pretty in a traditional sense. It was about power. They cut her hair into a sharp, chic bob that framed her face. They dressed her in a tailored navy suit with a high collar, modern, professional, but with a subtle nod to Eastern structured fashion. When Cassie looked in the mirror, she didn't see the girl who cried over spilt wine. She saw a woman who could command a fleet of ships. Are you ready? Arthur asked, standing at the door. He's going to be there, isn't he? Cassie asked. Damien? Oh, yes. He thinks he's signing the papers today. He thinks I'm just coming to concede defeat gracefully. Cassie adjusted her cuffs. She remembered the feeling of Damien's sneer. She remembered the pig comment. He's going to be surprised, Cassie said. That, Arthur grinned, is an understatement. The executive conference room on the 80th floor of the Empire State Building was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space of glass and steel, offering a panoramic view of the city that made the cars below look like ants. The air conditioning was set to a brisk 65 degrees, a tactic known as cold room negotiation, designed to keep opponents uncomfortable and eager to leave. Damien Cross sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking entirely at ease in the chill. He was flanked by a phalanx of 6 advisors, lawyers in pinstripes, financial analysts with tablets, and a nervous-looking chief engineer. They were a wall of corporate aggression. Opposite them sat Mr. Li and his delegation. The Chinese businessman was unreadable, his hands folded neatly on the table, a cup of lukewarm tea untouched before him. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 a.m. Damien checked his Rolex, a theatrical gesture meant to signal impatience. He looked at the empty seats across from him, where Arthur Pendleton's team should have been. "Mr. Li," Damien said, his voice smooth and dripping with false sympathy. "I think we have given Arthur enough of a grace period. It's a shame, really. Pendleton Logistics used to be a serious competitor, but I suppose old age catches up to us all. Perhaps it's time we proceed with the signing. My time, as you know, is quite expensive." Mr. Li didn't look at the contract Damien had pushed toward him. He merely glanced at the door. "Patience, Mr. Cross. A hasty tea burns the tongue." Damien suppressed an eye roll. He hated these proverbs. He just wanted the $4 billion. "Of course," Damien smiled, tight-lipped. "But efficiency is also a virtue." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors swung open. Arthur Pendleton walked in first, leaning on his silver-handled cane. Despite his age, he moved with a mischievous energy, like a man who knew the punchline to a joke no one else had heard yet. "Apologies for the delay, gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice booming. "Traffic on Fifth Avenue is a nightmare, but I assure you, the wait will be worth it." "Arthur," Damien sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. "Please tell me you didn't drag yourself all the way here just to beg for a subcontracting role. We've already allocated the logistics vendors. We don't have scraps left for you." "I'm not here for scraps, Damien," Arthur said, taking a seat calmly. "I'm here to save Mr. Li from making a catastrophic investment." Damien laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Save him? With what? Your outdated trucks and 1990s software?" "No," Arthur said. He gestured to the open door. "With her." The room went silent as Cassandra Sterling walked in. She didn't walk like a waitress. She didn't walk like the terrified girl who had been fired 3 nights ago. She walked with a measured, predatory grace. The navy suit she wore was sharp enough to cut, tailored to perfection. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional bob. She carried nothing but a slim leather tablet case. She walked to the table, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, a countdown clock ticking toward Damien's destruction. Damien squinted. For a second, his brain refused to process the visual data. He saw a woman who looked vaguely familiar, but the context was all wrong. Then, she stopped directly across from him and set her tablet down. She looked him in the eye, and the recognition hit him like a physical slap. His face went slack. "You," Damien whispered. Then his shock turned to outrage. He shot to his feet, slamming his hand on the table. "This is a joke. Arthur, have you lost your mind?" "Is there a problem?" Arthur asked innocently. "A problem?" Damien shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Cassie. "This is the help. This is the waitress from the gala. She spilled wine on me. She was fired for incompetence." He turned wildly to Mr. Li. "Mr. Li, I apologize for this insult. Arthur has brought a serving girl to a $1 billion negotiation. This is a mockery of your time." Cassie didn't flinch. She didn't look at Arthur for support. She didn't look at the floor. She waited for Damien to stop shouting, her expression one of polite boredom. When the room fell silent, she turned her head slightly to the Chinese delegation. "Li Zong, Hao Jiu Bu Jian," she said. Her voice was a rich, warm alto, the tones perfectly modulated for the formal setting. "President Li, long time no see." Mr. Li's eyes widened. A slow, genuine smile broke through his stoic mask. He stood up, a gesture of immense respect that made Damien's advisors gasp. "Miss Sterling," Mr. Li replied in Mandarin, bowing his head slightly. "I was hoping our paths would cross again, but I didn't expect to see you at this side of the table." "I have traded my tray for a strategy, sir," Cassie replied, switching effortlessly between Mandarin and English so the entire room could understand. "And I believe I have found the solution to the last-mile bottleneck that has been troubling your team." "Sit down," Damien barked, his face turning a shade of purple. "She is a fraud. She's probably an actress Arthur hired. She doesn't know the first thing about logistics." "Actually, Mr. Cross," Cassie said, turning her gaze on him. It was the first time she had addressed him directly. Her eyes were cold and sharp. "I hold a double major in international supply chain management and macroeconomics. I spent 5 years in Shanghai, managing freight for the Pacific Rim. And while you were busy inheriting your father's company, I was on the docks in Guangdong, learning how the river currents affect shipping schedules." She tapped her tablet. The massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "Let's look at the numbers, shall we?" Cassie said, taking control of the room. Damien remained standing, breathing heavily, but he looked like a general whose army had just deserted him. He slowly sank back into his chair, crossing his arms. "Fine, go ahead. Entertain us. Let's see what the waitress has to say." Cassie brought up a 3D map of the Guangdong province. It was overlaid with red lines, Damien's proposed route. "Mr. Cross's proposal," Cassie began, using a laser pointer to highlight the heavy red lines, "relies on a hub-and-spoke model. He wants to build 3 massive concrete distribution centers, here, here, and here. To do this, he needs to widen the provincial roads to accommodate Class A heavy trucks." She paused, looking at Damien's chief engineer. "Is that correct?" The engineer, a man named Vance, looked down at his shoes. "Yes, that is the plan." "Here is the problem," Cassie said, her voice sharpening. "The roads in Sihu and Beishan are not built on bedrock. They are built on ancient marshland compaction. If you run Class A trucks on those roads for more than 3 months, the vibration will cause liquefaction. The roads will collapse. Your supply chain will snap." She swiped the screen. A simulation showed the roads cracking and trucks stuck in the mud. "Not only that," Cassie continued, "but the widening project requires the demolition of the ancestral shrine in Tonglu village. Mr. Cross, are you aware of the cultural significance of that shrine to the local workers you plan to hire?" Damien scoffed. "We can buy them a new shrine. Everyone has a price." Mr. Li flinched. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "It is not about price, Mr. Cross," Cassie said softly. "It is about face. If you destroy that shrine, the local unions will strike. You won't move a single box. Your $4 billion investment will be a paperweight." "She's bluffing," Damien snapped, though sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. "Marshland liquefaction? That's a myth. My team did the surveys." "Did they?" Cassie countered. She pulled up a document on the screen. It was a soil report. "Because I found this geological survey from 1998 in the provincial archives. It confirms the water table is less than 2 meters below the surface." She looked at Damien's engineer again. "Did you show this to Mr. Cross?" The engineer went pale. He looked at Damien, then at Cassie, then at Mr. Lee. I tried to, sir. But Mr. Cross said, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. He said the environmental concerns were for tree huggers. Damien slammed his fist on the table. You're fired, Vance! Shut your mouth! A leader who fires his team for telling the truth is a leader who is steering the ship into an iceberg, Cassie said calmly. Enough! Damien roared. So your plan is what? Don't build? We just teleport the goods? No, Cassie said. She swiped the screen again. The angry red lines disappeared, replaced by a soothing, flowing blue network. We use the water, she said. The Pearl River Delta has been the lifeblood of trade for 1,000 years. My proposal utilizes a fleet of flat-bottomed, electric motor barges. They don't need roads. They don't vibrate the soil. They are silent. And they can dock directly at the village piers, creating jobs for the local boatmen instead of displacing them. She turned to Mr. Lee. It is 40% cheaper to implement. It produces 60% less carbon. And most importantly, Mr. Lee, it flows with the land, not against it. It is the path of least resistance. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of awe. Mr. Lee was staring at the blue lines on the map. He looked like a man who had been offered a glass of cool water after a long walk in the desert. He slowly closed the thick binder containing Damien's proposal. The sound of the cover hitting the table echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Cross, Mr. Lee said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a sentence. Yes, Damien said, his voice cracking. He sat up straighter, trying to salvage the moment. Look, Mr. Lee, these are just pretty graphics. We have the capital. We have the... Mr. Cross, Mr. Lee interrupted. 3 nights ago, at the gala, you stood in front of me and called this woman trash. You said she was stupid as a pig. You said the lower class had no breeding. Damien froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Mr. Lee gestured to Cassie. This woman has shown me more intelligence, more foresight, and more honor in 15 minutes than you have shown in 6 months of negotiations. You see a waitress. I see a partner. Mr. Lee stood up. He picked up his fountain pen, a gold Mont Blanc. He didn't look at Damien anymore. He looked at Arthur. Mr. Pendleton, I accept your counteroffer. The electric barge initiative is brilliant. We sign with you. No! Damien shrieked. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the room. You can't do this. We have a verbal agreement. I'll sue. I'll bury you in litigation. You can try, Arthur said, smiling coldly. But I think you'll find your board of directors will be very interested to hear why you lost the biggest deal of the decade to a waitress. In fact, I believe they are watching the live stream of this meeting right now. Damien turned to the camera mounted in the corner of the room. The little red light was blinking. He realized with a sickening lurch that his career wasn't just over. It was incinerated. Cassie watched him. She remembered the way he had looked at her shoes. She remembered the way he had wiped his sleeve off as if she were a disease. She walked over to the side table where a pitcher of ice water sat. She poured a glass. She walked back to Damien. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the table. A broken man. Cassie placed the glass of water gently in front of him. Mr. Cross, she said softly. He looked up, his eyes rimmed with red, filled with hate and humiliation. You look a little pale, Cassie said, a small, polite smile playing on her lips, the same smile she used to give difficult customers. Drink some water. It will help with the shock. She turned to leave, but paused and looked back over her shoulder. Oh, and don't worry about the glass, she added. I'm sure someone will clean it up for you. but I'm afraid it won't be me. I don't serve anymore." The scratching of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in New York City. When Mr. Lee handed the signed contract to Cassie, the air in the room shifted irrevocably. It wasn't just a business deal, it was a coronation. Damien Cross sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at the signature, then at Cassie, then at the door, as if expecting a camera crew to jump out and tell him this was a prank reality show. "This is invalid," Damien whispered, his voice cracking. "She's a fraud. Mr. Lee, you can't be serious. You're signing with a nobody." Mr. Lee stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at Damien. He looked at Cassie. "Miss Sterling, my team will be in touch with your office to schedule the site visits. I look forward to your River Network implementation. It is good to do business with people who have a soul." "Thank you, President Lee," Cassie said, bowing her head. "We won't let you down." As the Chinese delegation filed out of the room, Damien finally snapped. He lunged across the table, grabbing the edge of the mahogany. "You think you've won?" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You think because you learned a few fancy words you can play in the big leagues? I will bury you. I have lawyers on retainer who will tie this deal up in court for a decade. I will sue you for corporate espionage. I will—" "Mr. Cross." The voice came from the corner of the room. It was deep, calm, and dangerous. Stepping out of the shadows was the man who had been sitting quietly next to Arthur Pendleton the entire time. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark, intense eyes. He had been introduced simply as legal counsel, but now his presence filled the room. "Who are you?" Damien sneered. "Another one of Arthur's charity cases?" The man walked forward and placed a business card on the table. "My name is Gabriel Stone, senior partner at Vanguard & Stone, and as of this morning, I am also the acting legal representative for the board of directors of Cross Atlantic Tech." Damien blinked. "What? That's my company. You don't represent me." "No," Gabriel said, his voice smooth as silk. "I represent the board, and the board met in an emergency session 20 minutes ago, while you were shouting at Miss Sterling. They watched the live stream of this meeting. Mr. Lee insisted the negotiations be recorded for transparency." Damien's face drained of blood. "Recorded?" "Every word," Gabriel confirmed. "The board has voted, Damien. They are invoking the moral turpitude clause in your contract. Your behavior today, combined with the pending PR disaster of the viral video, has been deemed grossly negligent and damaging to the company brand. You're out, Damien. Effective immediately." Damien staggered back, hitting the wall. "You can't fire me. I built that company." "And today you almost destroyed it," Cassie said. She walked around the table, standing next to Gabriel. The two of them stood like a united front, iron and steel. "Security is waiting in the lobby to escort you out of the building. I suggest you go before they have to drag you." Damien looked at Cassie. For the first time, he didn't see a waitress. He saw a titan. He opened his mouth to speak, but found he had no words left. He turned and walked out the door, a broken man, stripped of his empire by the very person he deemed unworthy to shine his shoes. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent, but the energy was electric. Arthur Pendleton was beaming like a proud grandfather. "I haven't had that much fun since 1985, Arthur chuckled, tapping his cane. "Did you see his face? I think he actually stopped breathing for a minute." "It was intense," Cassie admitted, letting out a long breath she felt she'd been holding for 3 days. Her knees suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline was crashing. She stumbled slightly, and a strong hand caught her elbow. "I've got you," Gabriel said gently. Cassie looked up. During the 72 hours of preparation in the war room, Gabriel had been a constant presence. He was the one who prepared the legal briefs, the one who brought her coffee at 3 a.m., the one who drilled her on the counter-arguments. He had been professional, cold even. But now, looking at him, she saw warmth. "You were incredible up there," Gabriel said, not letting go of her arm. "I've seen seasoned diplomats crumble under Mr. Lee's silence. You owned the room." "I had a good team," Cassie said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the heat. Arthur cleared his throat. "Well, I believe I have a press conference to handle. Gabriel, why don't you take our new Vice President of Operations out for a celebratory drink? I think she's earned it." "Vice President?" Cassie's eyes widened. "You didn't think I'd let you go back to the temp agency, did you?" Arthur winked as the elevator doors opened. "The contract is signed, Cassie. You're the lead on the Guangdong project. Welcome to the firm." Arthur walked off toward the waiting swarm of reporters, leaving Cassie and Gabriel alone in the lobby. "So," Gabriel said, a small, crooked smile appearing on his face. "Vice President Sterling, can I buy you a drink, or perhaps a bottle of that champagne you were carrying the other night? I promise not to spill it." Cassie laughed. It was a genuine, happy sound. "No champagne. I think I'm ready for something stronger. Whiskey?" "Neat." Gabriel offered her his arm. "Whiskey it is." 6 months later, New York City moves fast. In 6 months, the scandal of Damien Cross was old news, replaced by the meteoric rise of Cassie Sterling. She was featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Sterling Standard: How One Woman Redefined Global Logistics." Her story, the waitress who spoke 4 languages and took down a billionaire, had become modern folklore. But Cassie didn't let it go to her head. She worked harder than ever. She spent 3 weeks a month in China, overseeing the implementation of the river network. It was a massive success. The villagers were employed, the pollution levels dropped, and profit margins soared. However, there was one loose end. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when Cassie walked into the Gilded Lily, a new, ultra-exclusive restaurant that had just opened in Manhattan. It was the kind of place Damien Cross used to frequent. Velvet ropes, golden fixtures, and a wait list 6 months long. Cassie walked to the front podium. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat and diamond earrings that Gabriel had given her for her birthday. "Good evening," the hostess said, looking flustered. "Do you have a reservation?" "I'm the owner," Cassie said softly. The hostess's eyes widened. "Oh, Ms. Sterling, I didn't realize you were coming in tonight. We have the private table ready." Cassie had bought the restaurant group a month ago. It was a diversified investment, according to her portfolio manager. But really, it was for this specific moment. "Actually," Cassie said, scanning the dining room, "I'm looking for a specific employee. I heard you hired a new busboy last week." The hostess looked confused. "Yes, Mum, he's a bit older than our usual staff, and he's had some trouble adjusting, but he needed the work." "Point him out." The hostess gestured to the back corner, near the kitchen doors. There he was, Damien Cross. He looked different. He had lost weight. His hair was thinning and unkempt. He was wearing a busboy's uniform that was a size too small, clearing plates from a table of loud, obnoxious finance bros who were roughly the same age Damien had been when he ruled the world. "Hey, buddy!" one of the finance bros yelled, snapping his fingers at Damien. "This water is warm. Get me some ice. Chop, chop." Damien flinched. His jaw tightened. For a second, the old rage flashed in his eyes. But then reality set in. He had no money. He had been sued into oblivion by his former board. His reputation was radioactive. No one would hire him for a corporate job. This was it. "Yes, sir," Damien muttered, keeping his head down. "Right away." He turned to go to the kitchen and froze. Cassie was standing in his path. The restaurant seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, a mirror image of that night at the plaza. But everything was reversed. Damien gripped the dirty dishes in his hands. His knuckles turned white. Shame, hot and burning, flooded his face. He couldn't look her in the eye. "Cassandra," he croaked. "It's Miss Sterling," she corrected him gently. She looked at his uniform. She looked at the stain on his apron. "I heard the service here was slipping," Cassie said. Her voice wasn't cruel, it was indifferent. "I bought the place to ensure standards are maintained." Damien looked up, horror dawning on him. You own this?" "I do," Cassie said, "which means I sign your paychecks, Damien." Damien looked like he wanted to vomit. He looked at the exit. He could walk out. He could throw the dishes down and storm out to preserve his last shred of pride. But he had rent to pay. He had debt collectors calling. He slumped. I need this job." Cassie stepped closer. She could have fired him. She could have humiliated him in front of the whole room. She could have poured wine on him. But she realized, looking at him, that he wasn't worth the energy. He was already in his own personal hell. "Then do it well," Cassie said. "Table 4 needs ice. And Damien?" He looked at her. "Don't let me hear you speaking rudely to the guests, or the staff. In this establishment, everyone is treated with respect. Do you understand?" Damien swallowed hard. He nodded. "Yes, Ms. Sterling." "Good. Carry on." Cassie turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She walked through the dining room toward the private booth where Gabriel was waiting. He stood up as she approached, a glass of that expensive red wine in his hand. He kissed her cheek. "Everything okay?" Gabriel asked, glancing at the busboy in the corner. Cassie sat down, smoothing her dress. She took the glass of wine. She looked at the man she loved, at the life she had built, and at the city that tried to break her but only made her stronger. "Everything is perfect," Cassie smiled. She took a sip of the wine. Not a drop spilled. And that is the story of Cassandra Sterling, from a humiliated waitress cleaning up after a billionaire to the woman who signed his paychecks. It's a brutal reminder that karma doesn't always come instantly, but when it hits hard. Damien Cross learned the hard way that you should never judge someone by their uniform, because the person you're stepping on today might be the one buying your company tomorrow. What do you guys think? Did Damien deserve to end up as a busboy, or was Cassie too harsh? And have you ever had a moment where you silenced a hater with pure success? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new drama storytelling videos every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge isn't anger, it's massive success. See you in the next video.